This is African American History is American History. She was a fearless 19th century anti-slavery lecturer, activist, and early women's rights advocate. Sarah Parker Remond fought against discrimination and raised awareness internationally of the inhumane condition of the enslaved here in America. Born a free woman in Salem, Massachusetts on June 6, 1826, Sarah Parker Remond was one of 11 children of John and Nancy Remond. Her mother, Nancy, was born in Newton, Massachusetts. She was the daughter of Cornelius Lennox, a Revolutionary War veteran who had fought in the Continental Army. Sarah's father, John Remond, was a free person of color who immigrated to Massachusetts as a 10-year-old child in 1798 from the Dutch colony of Curaçao. John and Nancy married in October of 1807 in the African Baptist Church in Boston. They moved to Salem and built successful catering, provisioning, and hairdressing businesses, becoming well-established business people and activists. The Remonds tried to place their children in a private school, but were rejected because of their race. Sarah and her sisters were accepted to a local high school for girls, which was not segregated. But when the school committee founded a separate school for African American children, they were expelled. Sarah Parker Remond later described the incident as
engraved in my heart like the scarlet letter of Hester.
In 1835, the Remond family moved to Newport, Rhode Island, where they had hoped to find a less racist environment in which to educate their children. However, the schools there refused to accept black students. Instead, some influential African Americans established a private school where Remond was educated.
Although I had few leisure hours, I read more or less daily. Our home was constantly supplied with the best daily and weekly newspapers, and I could obtain from public libraries and often from the private libraries of friends some of the best English and American literature. These were resources of which even prejudice could not deprive me. A book once obtained, I could peruse it with pleasure and profit. When some abolitionist who had buried all prejudice against color which education and habit had taught, when such a one was the guest of my parents, I treasured up in the storehouse of memory the information derived from conversations in the society of some of the most gifted of the sons and daughters of America. These opportunities were not frequent, but they were valuable. Reading was the staple and never-failing resource.
Sarah Parker Remond made her first public speech against the institution of slavery when she was only 16 years old, and delivered abolitionist speeches throughout the northeastern United States. One of her brothers, Charles Lennox Remond, became well known as an orator, and they occasionally toured together for their abolitionist lectures. On May 4th, 1853, Sarah Parker Remond had bought tickets by post for herself and a group of friends, including historian William C. Nell, to the popular opera Don Pasquale at the Howard Athenaeum, one of the most famous theaters in Boston history, finally closing in 1953 and demolished in 1962. They entered the theater intending to enjoy the popular opera, but when the manager discovered that they were people of color, he directed them to the segregated balcony. Remond and her companions refused to sit there. When they were forced to leave, an argument ensued, and Sarah was pushed down a flight of stairs. The police were summoned, and when they arrived, the officers handled Sarah and her companions roughly. Refusing to be intimidated, she sued and won $500 in damages. The court ordered the manager to admit that she had been wronged, and also ordered the theater to integrate all seating. Now, in theory, black people in the non-slave-owning states of the North were free and equal citizens of the United States, but that was in theory. In practice, they were subject to constant prejudice, segregation, and racism. In addition to schools, many churches refused to admit them, while in cities such as New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, they weren't allowed in many stores, hotels, or even able to sit wherever they wanted on streetcars. The Remond family challenged discrimination on all fronts. Sarah's brother Charles was the first black man to testify before the Massachusetts House when he protested being forced to sit in segregated railway cars. Just another example of the racism Massachusetts blacks faced in their own home state.
While our mother never excused those who unjustly persecuted those whose only crime was a dark complexion, her discipline taught us to gather strength from our own souls, and we felt the full force of the fact that to be black was no crime.
This is African American History is American History. In 1856, Sarah Parker Remond became an agent of the American Anti-Slavery Society. Now, this was an abolitionist society founded by William Lloyd Garrison and Arthur Tappan. Frederick Douglass was a key leader of this society and often spoke at its meetings. Both Sarah and her brother Charles were also supporters of women's suffrage. They spoke at a women's rights convention in New York City in 1858. Also in 1858, Sarah chose to travel to Britain to gather support for the growing abolitionist cause in the United States.
I appeal on behalf of 4 million men, women, and children, not because they are identical with my race and color, though I am proud of that identity, but because they are men and women.
While in London, Sarah Parker Remond studied at Bedford College, lecturing during term breaks. During her lectures, Sarah addressed a topic rarely addressed by male abolitionists, namely the treatment of female slaves. She appealed directly to the women in the audience.
On behalf of the female slave, the most deplorably and helplessly wretched of human sufferers, of all who dropped and writhed under the infliction of this horrible system, the greatest sufferer is defenseless women. For the male slave, however brutally treated, there are some resources, but for the woman slave, there is neither protection nor pity. They are exposed for sale and subjected to the most shameful indignities. The more Anglo-Saxon blood that mingles with the blood of the slave, the more gold is poured out when the auctioneer has a woman for sale, because they are sold to be concubines for white Americans.
When the Civil War began in America in 1861, she appealed for support among the British public for the Union and their blockade of the Confederacy. In 1865, after the war was over, she appealed for funds to support the millions of newly emancipated freedmen and women in the South. Even with the war over and slavery ended, Sarah chose not to return to the United States. Yet she was a critic of post-war Reconstruction and the prejudice that accompanied it. In 1866, Sarah went to Italy to pursue her medical training full-time in Florence. She became a physician and practiced medicine for nearly 20 years in Italy. In 1877, at the age of 50, Sarah married an Italian man, Lazzaro Pintor. In 1877, Frederick Douglass and his second wife, Helen, who were undertaking a year-long tour of Europe, visited Sarah and Lazzaro and two of Sarah's sisters, who were now all residing in Rome. Following this, Frederick Douglass wrote that the Remond sisters
detest prejudice of color and say they would not live in the United States, even if you would or could give them a true America.
Sarah Parker Remond never returned to the United States. She died in Rome on December 13, 1894, at the age of 68. Back in 1964, in Jonesboro, Louisiana, a group of black World War II veterans who believed in armed self-defense formed the Deacons for Defense and Justice. The group's objective? To protect civil rights activists and their families who were threatened by the Ku Klux Klan, white vigilantes, and discriminatory treatment by police under Jim Crow law. On February 21st, 1965, the first affiliated chapter of the Deacons for Defense and Justice was founded in Bogalusa, Louisiana, followed by a total of 20 other chapters in Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Alabama. The Bogalusa chapter gained national attention during the summer of 1965 in its violent struggles with the Ku Klux Klan. The Deacons for Defense and Justice represented a new face of the civil rights movement as they emerged as one of the first visible self-defense forces in the South. The strategy and methods that the Deacons employed attracted the attention and concern of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is African American History is American History. The FBI authorized an investigation into the group's activities, but it stalled when more influential Black Power organizations, such as the Black Panther Party, emerged following the 1965 Watts riot. Most of the civil rights organizations at the time were also concerned about the Deacons' methods. They either kept silent about them or rejected their activities altogether. However, the Deacons for Defense and Justice proved to be effective in providing protection for local African Americans who sought to register to vote and for Black and white civil rights workers in the area. With public attention, as well as the attention of the FBI, focused elsewhere, the Deacons lost most of their notoriety and slowly declined in influence. By 1968, the Deacons' activities had come to an end. From that year forward, with the entry of blacks in politics in the South, control of more political and economic activities in Black communities was achieved. In 2003, a television movie called Deacons for Defense, directed by Bill Duke and starring Forrest Whitaker, aired. It focused on the 1965 events in Bogalusa, Louisiana, and the formation of the group. Even though racial polarization is still a hot-button topic for discussion today, young people often struggle to comprehend just how difficult life was for blacks in the 1960s, or just how necessary the Deacons for Defense and Justice really were. Long before Jesse Owens's remarkable Olympic feats, there was John Baxter Taylor Jr., a 5'11", 160-pound lightning speed runner who became the first black athlete from the U.S. to compete at any international sporting event and the first black athlete to win an Olympic gold medal. John Baxter Taylor Jr. was born in Washington, D.C. on November 3, 1882. Both his parents were former slaves. Unfortunately, his career and life were cut short. Less than 5 months after returning from the Olympic Games in London, Taylor died of typhoid fever on December 2, 1908, at the age of 26. Even though his time on the world stage was brief, John Baxter Taylor Jr.'s accomplishments were nothing short of remarkable. This has been African American History is American History. I'm Harlan Kearsley, and on behalf of everyone involved with African American History is American History, thank you for listening. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe. Once you do, you'll be notified as soon as new episodes are posted. Thanks again, and please stay safe. African American History is American History. Copyright H.C. Kearsley, 2025.